I wanted to start out with Indaba, which is together, and I want to start out with doing something together. So can I ask everyone to stand up with me? And find one person, or two if you're into that, but find one person, look at them, and repeat after me, not me, them. And I want you to say, I see you, I value you, and I acknowledge you. Okay, now hug. Wow, all right. Thank you, thank you. So I studied interaction design and information technology, so that makes me a designer who codes and a coder who designs. And seeing, valuing, and acknowledging is what I've been trying to do with my work as far as ways to create empathy between people, and empathy comes from understanding. In doing that, I have two ways of seeing the world. As a creative, I see the world through photography, and as a technologist, I see the world through data. And I acknowledge things happening around me by capturing them with my film camera. And I analyze and collect data about myself and others. And that's another way of seeing the world. And I'm constantly struggling with ways to bring those two together to sort of bridge the gap between feelings evoked in photography and the facts revealed in data visualization. I worked in the commercial space for about 8 years, doing everything from music videos and commercials to websites and installations. And a lot of my work involved data. So this is a project that I did for IBM called Data Baby, and it was a commercial where we used data from hospitals for babies to create this commercial. And I used code to animate all the I worked with a team to animate the particles to sort of follow the biorhythms of the baby. This is another project I did with financial data for Citibank, where I took that data and made this 3D visualization of their daily transactions over a 24-hour period. And last, this is a project that I did with Google Creative Lab for the Science Museum in London, where we mapped a trace route, which is how an image or any sort of data gets from the server to wherever you are in the world. And then after those 8 years, I sort of had the feeling like I wasn't doing projects that were really representing my beliefs and my values. And I like this, well, it's a lyric from Trinidad James, he's a rapper, and he says, if your life out of frame, change the picture. So that's what I did. I wanted to see technology as poetic, not just pragmatic, and I wanted to look at people as citizens, not just consumers. So I want to start with this image from 1984, which is the year I was born, and this is known as the Afghan girl. And since then, well, in 1984, there were 10 million refugees. Now there's 15 million. So looking at this image, I always think about how can we sort of bridge the gaps? How can we use data to look outside the frames of photography to find all the other millions of refugees? And that's when I started working with Hyperact, which is a social impact studio, design studio in Brooklyn, actually co-owned by 2 immigrants. And we started looking at this data over the last 40 years of refugee migration from the UNHCR over 169 countries. And so we created this map. It's an interactive map, and the circles are sized by the refugees, the number of refugees that originated from these countries. So the larger the circle, the larger the number of refugees that originated for that year. You're able to roll over each country, and the lines radiated from the circles to where those refugees found asylum. And then you could roll over each line to see the number of refugees that found asylum in those countries. But we didn't just want to show the data, we also wanted to tell stories about the social political events that may have caused some of the largest refugee migrations. And so we wrote over 100 stories and tried to highlight these. And it was the first time that you could sort of look at the refugee crisis in a nonlinear way, sort of going through the years and stopping in between to sort of read a story or two. And this project was the first project of mine that got international press, and I really like this article by Stephen Heller, where he emphasized that we used graphic design to visualize the aftermath of genocide and war. And I think that's when I realized that data can be beautiful, yet insightful, and also that data visualization and design could actually break the news cycle. Because we did this project in 2014 before the refugee crisis in Europe, and we were able to bring this issue back then all around the news and keep on bringing it back again and again. So this is a photo of the Fight for 15 protest in New York City, where they were fighting for to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour. And my questions for this project were, where will the people that are serving and building our city, will they be able to live in the city? And if so, if they do raise the minimum wage, how much will the areas that they can live in grow? And this is one way that this data has been shown. But what I wanted to do was just show where you could live on minimum wage in New York City versus where you couldn't live. So on the left, you see that's New York City on minimum wage, and on the right, you see where everyone can live in New York City based on higher wages. And what you're looking at is a 3D topographic map of New York City made out of laser-cut acrylic, hand-assembled, and submerged in water, only to show the areas above the water. But I didn't just want to show minimum wage versus higher wages. I wanted to show everything in between, so I created a display with a button, and when you press down on the button, it raises the minimum wage 18 times. And as you're pushing the button, the model raises out of the water as the wages get higher and higher, and you're able to afford to live in more areas. So I just want to show this video of the process. So this project was the first time I sort of had to step outside of my own sort of process of just coding web-based things and also installations where I wasn't actually building the installation. This may look 3D printed, but it's actually hand-assembled over 500 pieces of laser-cut acrylic. And it was the first time having to engineer things. It's really hard to make things with water and electronics, because they're not friends. Yeah. So once again, it was great to be able to use art to bridge the gap between underrepresented communities and underreported stories to the news, using art to bridge that gap between art and the news and social issues. And I sort of learned from this experience that data can be visceral and poetic, not just literal and pragmatic, like the refugee project was. So this is a photo of people in a park in New York City. And I might be a romantic, but I feel like parks shouldn't feel like internet cafes. I wanted to look at this data around street safety in New York City and see how I could sort of use this to talk about not safety and danger, but energy and awareness. So I came up with this thing called a energy score, which is a number between 1 and 5. And I coded these generative animations, which are different every single time. And from the left to the right, you can see that it gets more complex as it goes. And that's because the rings in the iris are more. And what the energy score was meant to do was sort of remind you that everyone has the energy, that we should be putting as much energy as we put into our phones back into the streets. And it was a subtle reminder. And then I put these animations in the home screen of this app that I created called Lookup. And it was really just to figure out ways to get people to actually connect in real life. So I used every intersection in New York City as a place for connections. And I just want to share this feature on it on Fox 5 News.
Right now on Fox 5 News at 10.
City sidewalks, of course, packed with people glued to their phones.
That's right. We used to all look up. Now we look down all the time. But a new app wants us to start us looking back up again. Matt King on one artist's unusual effort to curb your screen addiction.
I was Snapchatting and I was like late to work and I walked into a glass door.
I almost ran into a sign once.
Poles.
I once ran into a lamp.
I ran into a street lamp.
Yeah, the lamp was... It's a dangerous thing.
The number and the frequency of distractions now available on our phones can render the most mundane features of a city as bustling as New York into treacherous obstacles.
I've seen people walk into a wall.
I saw a person with a big, bloody, forehead.
And they ran into me.
If anything, I tripped over like a little unevenness in the sidewalk.
Artist and designer Ekene Ijeoma decided he needed to do something to reconnect New Yorkers in their city's physical spaces while watching people move around without raising their eyes from their screens.
Not having eyes on the streets felt like the city was starting to lose a lot of its energy.
So Ijeoma created a recurring intervention manifested through people's phones, an app called Lookup commissioned through Google Creative Labs, which runs in the background using GPS and alerts users when they approach an intersection.
There's the safety part of the project, but mostly this project is about empathy.
Empathy between pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers of all races, genders, ethnicities, and creeds. A lofty goal for an app only available for Androids in New York City, but Ijeoma says a worthy one. Lookup hopes to expand to other cities and iOS devices in the coming months, hopefully saving all who use it the physical and emotional harm caused by running into someone or something while staring at one's phone.
People, poles, cars, bikers, everything.
I was embarrassed, yes.
But I know people walk into other people's dogs.
It's just the most stupid thing in the world.
In Chelsea, I'm Matt King, Fox 5 News.
Thanks. So another thing I got from that project was that I can make data experiential. It doesn't have to be something where you just sit at a computer and experience. It doesn't have to be something that you have to go to a space and experience through an installation. It can actually be something where you actually have to go out into the city and experience it. The app only works when you're walking around, and those eyeballs only pop up at intersections. So this is a AIGA event in New York City, and AIGA is one of the largest professional design organizations in the US. And this year they did what they call the design census, where they took a survey of race, gender, location, seniority levels, and industries, and et cetera, and also pay. But one of the things I was most interested in was the diversity, and they commissioned me to make my own visualization. So what I wanted to do with this was actually put people face to face with the lack of diversity in design. And the way I wanted to do this was to create a webcam. And we know that based on these statistics that design is 73% white. So I wanted to take each one of these percentages for each one of the ethnicities and actually create a blur filter, starting with white, which is the most sharp, moving through them, and then finally at black, which is the most blurry. And everyone could go to this website and sort of see this for themselves. And it was a way of making whomever was looking at it sort of part of the experience. And it was good to see that these conversations could also be brought up through the media in Italy. And from this, I thought, well, data can also be self-referential. It doesn't have to be about everyone. It can actually relate to just one person. So I want to end with a few things. This quote from Quinn Norton, where she says, "My field must tackle describing a world where falling in love, going to war, and filling out tax forms looks the same." Really, a lot of the projects I did, they all could have been interactive maps, but I thought that they should have dedicated, committed sort of mediums for each issue. So just 3 things. Let's think like citizens, not just creatives. All right. Let's use data to educate citizens, not just market to consumers. And let's make conversation pieces, not just masterpieces. Thanks.